Newsflash: the era of negotiation has just ended. What will you do instead? Welcome to the Intentional Success Podcast, where we unpack the top strategies, explore business trends, and drill down into best practices to help your live events production business grow and scale on purpose. I'm your host, Tom Stimson. You know, I hear it every single week. There's no room left for negotiation. Clients call back and say, hey, thank you for your proposal, but we found somebody who was 30% less than you. See you next time. It's frustrating, isn't it? It's kind of annoying. All that work just to find out that you don't even know what the ballpark number was going to be. Now, we could just lead with our best price, right? Because, your competitor is apparently leading with theirs, and you wonder, is that 30% lower price, was that actually their best price? Maybe they're in a different business you're in. Maybe they're having a bad week. Maybe they were more hungry than you are. Maybe they know something you don't know. But that buyer also asked you for a line item proposal, didn't they? And we have to expose our pricing system so that buyers can pick and choose what they want to pay. And that's not negotiation. That's just kind of coercion. So what's really going on here? If we're not negotiating, what are we doing? I wrote a blog piece years ago that took the stance that apples to apples comparisons are your enemy. That RFP process that says, hey, please tell me what you're going to do and all the things you're going to throw in for free, but I do want to know how much those camera packages cost so I can compare you to the other respondents. That's a horrible way of doing business. I feel kind of ooky and exposed, and I still believe that. If you have to respond to an RFP that focuses on the cost of each element instead of the fulfillment of the design, well, then the buyer's in control, aren't they? Of course they are. They're not stupid. They know that. And they also know that there are no two apples are alike, right? Yes. Are they going to do an apples to apples comparison? Sure. Is it perfect? No. Apples are, some apples are sweet and juicy, and some are bitter, and some are mealy. I mean, how can you tell until you actually bite into it? Well, and there you go. That's your proposal. Here's your apple. Oh, man, I was really looking for an apple for a different reason than the one that you came up with. Look, what we want are not apple-to-apple comparisons. We want a chance to negotiate, but if we're not going to get that, then we want an apple-to-apple pie comparison. And how can you take all of your apples and put them together in a pie and make it appear more valuable to your customer? And then what price do you need to put on it? Look, lots of people are going to sell by ingredients. Lots of people are going to respond to RFPs. They're going to sharpen their pencil. They're going to get to that bottom number. And you want to sell the finished product. Good for you. Well, in fact, they are selling a finished product as well. But let's don't mince our apples here, right? What is it the customer wants, right? Do they care how you got your proposal together? No, they just want to look at it in a way that they understand, because ultimately they're going to buy on what? Buy on price. Who could blame them? How else would you compare these two companies? Now, we talked about things like selling a service. I mean, imagine you sold a service instead of a list of rental items plus labor plus trucking plus travel, right? If you sold a service, what if you could say, hey, I can provide for you technical production for a 7-hour business meeting with 150 attendees. It's going to include a stage manager that assures the presenters feel confident, make sure that the audience isn't distracted, that we stay on schedule and at budget. I provide a technical team that makes sure the content and media are seen and heard, the presenters are intelligible, the audience is engaged, and the tone of the event goes as intended. And what does the customer need to decide? The customer, well, you could choose the scenic look from a list of options. You get to decide where the audience sits. You get to choose your own agenda. I will decide what technology to provide, where to place the elements so the audience can see, hear, and experience the event as intended. I can I will decide how to support the presenters so they can see their content, hear the audience, and look their best. If my service looks like that, then the buyer gets a clear price and an associated scope of work, appropriate fit and finish, and some flexibility because they have some choices. Everything that is optional would probably have a line item price. Yeah, you want an extra camera with that? Here's what it costs. Now, your competitor could do the same job for less, in theory, by sending inadequate equipment, a smaller technical team, not accommodating requests, not being as easy to work with. They could be a mealy apple. So, customer now has these two proposals in place, your service proposal and somebody else's line item proposal. And what do negotiations look like? Well, if the customer believes that your apple pie is better than the other guys, you're negotiating from a position of strength. And in fact, you're not negotiating. They're going, whoa, this is my price. Well, these guys are 30% less, but they're not really doing what I want. Awesome. I've already given you my best price. Are you going to negotiate or not? Well, yeah, you're probably going to negotiate, but this is not what's happening anymore. You're telling me you're not getting to have this conversation. You're trying to do all the things that I've taught over the years that says, hey, I want that customer to be a little bit insecure about pulling the trigger. We're going to talk back and forth a little bit and see if I can't massage things. I left myself a little wiggle room in that extra money in there. I can come down a little bit, right? They just have to ask me. But I'm hearing that's not working anymore. So is your pricing wrong? Do you need to compromise sooner? Are you waiting to be asked to drop your price because you want to please the person across the table? I mean, didn't you want the job to begin with? Why didn't you price it more aggressively? Were you betting on negotiation? Yeah. So the time to negotiate is actually, well, it's now. And the only thing that you have to negotiate with at this point is urgency. And the negotiation is actually with yourself. So you can say, hey, I can sign the contract now. I'll take 10% off, but you've got to sign it too. What? Guess what? Everybody else made the same offer. The guy that's 30% less than you put another 10% on the table if that client would sign today. Everybody's doing that. Negotiating is disingenuous. You had to hold something back. The buyer knows you were holding something back. Do they want to negotiate with 5 suppliers who all held something back? Or do they want to go straight to the supplier that makes the most sense to them and squeeze another 5 or 10 points out of them? Follow the money. What do you think's going to happen? The death of negotiation is not really a bad thing. Given our flaky pricing structures, or fact that all of our retail prices are made up, discounts, we're just pulling them out of our hat. Why would the customer want to negotiate when all they're getting out of it is a price and you're moving a bunch of arcane, mysterious levers that no one can see because you didn't want to deliver a detailed RFP response? Buyers use price to ascertain value. It's really, there's other clues that they get in your proposal about, how professional do you look? Maybe your gear looks newer or whatever it is. Oh my, that's a big camera. But without price, their value formula is incomplete. And if all you have is price and saying, we can take care of all of this and do what you described, that's 90% done. So all that, what is that other information supposed to do if it's not going to trigger a negotiation? Now, sellers, people like you and me who've been selling events for years, we traditionally focus on price too. Okay. But we know our price is meaningless because it's all about value. We assign prices to try and protect our value in various areas, But then we find other ways to discount in order to get the price that the buyer will pay or won't pay. In other words, we've always priced with the assumption that there would be a negotiation. And we're not afraid to say, hey, I don't need to make money on labor. I can make more money over here on the equipment. So we create these unfortunate precedents that we're always afraid of in our pricing systems because we think there's going to be a negotiation. The seller, because we're moving 25 different numbers around, we're doing calculus. The buyer's just doing simple addition and subtraction, right? 10% more, 10% less. They're working from a price. The price will define things. We're doing calculus that says, well, wait a minute. Hey, if I'm not that busy that week, or if so-and-so is available, or if I can get that truck, or if we can use this projector, all these things are changing what your price is going to be. That's nuts. No wonder buyers send out detailed RFPs because they don't want to listen to your math. They don't want to see what you did. They just want to know what are they actually going to get for the price. And they're going to compare that price to somebody else's price and cut out the negotiation step because it doesn't really get them very much. They're not going to get better gear by negotiating. You're just going to change your price. So why should they negotiate? Somebody else can negotiate instead. Look, if the buyer's math is price, what should the seller math be? Right? Is it your pricing structure? No. It's about margin. At the end of the day, all you care is how much money I'm going to make off of this job. And we might know that every job is going to vary because every job will generate profit differently or margin differently. But we don't want to believe that, right? Margin is all you're really negotiating for when you negotiate at all. And the buyer decides how much they want to pay because they live in the world of price. You decide how much you want to make because you live in the world of margin. Everything else is noise. And it all sounds so simple until you ask sellers how they determine what their margin will be. And then the weird math really comes out. I mean, we were doing calculus before. We're doing mystical work now. Oh, what if we're busy? What if we're slow? Shouldn't we expect this to make a certain amount of profit to cover over our heads? What about burden? What about burden? Oh, that's why we job cost, so we know what our margins are, right? No, not even close. Once we start talking about job costing, we have gone in to magic, right? Margin is simple if you ignore job costing. Job cost only applies to a job after it is over, and all the variables are outside the job's control are then factored in. That's the only time the job cost, predictive job costing, is a myth. Even if you were able to do it, if you forced every job to follow its predictive job cost path, you would miss all the opportunities of cost advantages that are tied up in having multiple jobs at the same time. Why would anybody do that? It makes no sense at all. Why would the one-day job with a predictive job cost that says everything was available in the warehouse when I wrote the order and all my technicians were sitting on the bench when I wrote the order, so my job cost looks great? Why would we follow that when 3 week-long jobs stacked on top of it? We wouldn't. It makes no sense at all. So why would predictive job costing even be a tool? Now, margin is simple if you ignore job costing. Margin is a predictive formula when examining a single project. When you're looking backwards, margin is the average of all the jobs in a given period. So if you want to say, yeah, if I take all the job costs and this job was very profitable, but that doesn't matter if I'm looking backwards because I have to look at all the other jobs. So margin, when you look backwards, is looking at all the jobs in a given period and seeing how well they did collectively, because individual performance of those jobs is now irrelevant. We've applied the logic of shared resources and optimizing resources to all of the jobs. The jobs no longer own their outcomes. They share their outcomes, right? So, but we were talking about negotiation. If you want to put your best price forward to win business, because you know there is not going to be an opportunity to negotiate, then predictive margin is the only math you need. And it's awesome because it's so simple. It works like this, right? Are you ready? For any given project, you determine what costs will likely be. Do not try and use the Jenga calculus that considers all the other jobs that are going on at that time. Just look at this job. How much do we expect to spend on subrentals if this job confirms? Well, if there's a specialty item in there, there's a direct cost. We can factor that. Otherwise, it's just the general share of subrentals that all the other jobs have. Look at your trailing 12-month subrentals. It's 10, 12, 15%, whatever that number is. Easy to figure out. So how much would you expect to spend on subrentals? What will the labor costs be? Well, whether you hire them inside or outside, your costs are really pretty much the same. You always have trucking and you always have travel, so you probably knew what those numbers. Matter of fact, to even begin to build the quote, you had most of your costs sitting down in front of you. Why did you go a step further? Well, I know I got to subrent projectors and I got to have 3 technicians and we've got to travel and we've got trucking. Okay. You're still thinking about the sell price right now, aren't you? You're thinking of things as a percentage of a sell price, but you don't know what the sell price is. That's the whole point of this conversation. You add up your hard costs, the variable costs of goods sold, if you will. Okay. Don't even try to guess that you need 10% of revenue to cover subrentals because you don't know what the revenue number is going to be yet. That's the number we're trying to figure out. So we can't go through this Burroughs math where we figure out what our margin is so we can figure out what our revenue is so we can figure out what our margin is. All you need to know is what your costs are. Add up your hard costs. It's pretty simple. Throw on a little bit more if you think you're missing something. It's probably a good practice. Now, the question is, how much profit would you like to make? Oh, I'd like to make a lot of profit, Tom. Awesome. Get ready to be disappointed because nobody's negotiating. People are getting multiple bids. No one's going to let you steal from them, right? Let's take a small job, for example, right? It's a small job for you. Probably $15,000 in your mind is what that job's worth based on that retail pricing system you came up with, the discount structure and all that, blah, 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 right? Now, you've priced it in your head, so you've already poisoned the pot a little bit, but it's okay. It's human behavior. We do this. Now, what are the costs? Well, you know there's going to be a couple $1,000s in subrental. You can quickly add up that there's $2,500 in labor. There's no travel. You got $500 in delivery. My costs are $5,000. I'd like to make $5,000. I'm going to sell the job for 10. Awesome. Great. You made a 50% margin. What's the customer going to see? They're going to see a $10,000 price. What's it worth to them? Well, you know what? Chances are they're going to see quotes as low as $5,000 from companies that have no other work going on. They go, wait, I don't have any subrental costs. I've got people that I'm already paying who could go out and do this job. I own my own truck. My costs are $0. Maybe my costs are $1,000. I'd be happy to make $3,000 or $4,000 profit. I can charge the client $5,000 and I'll make a profit. Were they cheating? No, they're using the same math that you were using. You were just greedier, right? So what is the minimum you would take that is better than 0? You have no control over what somebody else's minimum is. You have no control over a competitor who's got a slower week, has more resources sitting on the shelf. There's a reason buyers care whether or not you own your own equipment and have technicians on staff. The reason they care is that if you have your own equipment and you have technicians on staff, you can be cheaper. If they catch you at the right time, they know your price is going to be low. So in our example here, you decide that you could settle for a couple thousand, $3,000 profit. Oh, 2,000. Okay, good for you. Great. You have 5,000 in cost, 2,000 in profit. You settle on a price of 7,000. Now what happens? You go back into your quoting system, you apply a discount to the equipment, and you keep applying it until you hit an overall price of $7,000. Did you end up at a 100% discount? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Who cares? The point is, the job will make you $2,000, which is adequate for you. The reason you have the asset of physical inventory so that at times like this, you can grab margin, which is profit, right? And the next time the margin you would settle for might be higher because maybe you're busier. Good for you. Price the job accordingly. Remember that apples to apples things, right? Your apple pie is worth more to you when there are more likely buyers. Well, if you don't hire us, somebody else will probably hire us that week. I still want to make $5,000. Awesome. I'm glad you get to make that choice. But my point is that you need to make that choice because you're not going to get a chance to negotiate. You're probably not going to get a chance to change your price. And if you went from a $10,000 quote to a $7,000 quote, who's ever going to believe your quotes ever again? When there are limited buyers, accept the margin that's available so you can generate gross profit to pay for your apples. Commit to a margin, commit to the profit that you're willing to take your best number to the table, and don't rely on negotiation because negotiation is a binary outcome. Either I get some profit or I get zero. And if zero is not an acceptable number for you, why are you going to the table with $5 or $10 or $50,000 worth of profit when you would have accepted $2? If you need the gig and if you need that $2,000, and sometimes we do, go to the table with $2,000. If you go with 3 and you don't win the job, but 2 would have won it, well, 2's better than 0. Is there some gambling in this? Of course there is. But gamble knowing you're not going to get a chance to change your bet in the middle of the process. When have you ever sat down at the blackjack table in Las Vegas, placed a bet, had the dealer turn over their card, you see a face card, you go, I want to change my bet. You don't get to do that. And you don't get to do that here anymore. So when the next win is important to your business, whether it's a cash flow emergency or a client you don't want to lose or miss out on, ditch the calculus, do some simple math, and make some margin. I hope it helps. Thanks for listening. If you want to find out more about today's episode, go to trstimson.com/podcast, where you'll find the show notes, related links, and tons of other valuable resources. If you haven't already subscribed to the Intentional Success Podcast, please do so, and I'd greatly appreciate if you would rate and review the show. Also, if you think you might be a good fit to work together or want more information about the Stimson Group, I'd love to hear from you. Visit trstimson.com for more information.